Be Frank Network. Content on this production is for entertainment and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, nor is it intended to substitute medical treatment or diagnosis. Seek medical help if you believe that you are suffering from a mental illness or are a threat to yourself or others. By using any or all of the information provided, you do so at your own risk. Any application of the material is at the listener's discretion and is his or her sole responsibility.
Everybody, Doc Brian here, and welcome to Doc Talks, where we talk about people's troubles, trials, tribulations, and hopefully triumphs in life. This episode will air, or is airing, the week of Memorial Day, so I wanted to do something a little different in having a guest that could relate to Memorial Day more so than others. And so I have with me today Micah Briley, who is a member of a Gold Star family. And Micah, it's good to have you with us here today.
Brian. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So could you just start off for the benefit of our listeners, tell us exactly what it means to be a Gold Star family?
Well, Brian, first of all, my brother, Donovan, Chief Warrant Officer W3, was killed in Somalia in 1993. And you and I had discussed a little bit before this interview of exactly, what that I would hope to accomplish in talking to you about Gold Star families. I always try to remember that, it's not about me or the loss that I have as much as the price that my brother paid for the freedom that a lot of people take for granted every day in this country.
Well, and it's unique here as a pastor of a church on Donovan Briley Boulevard. I've heard a lot of stories about. We mentioned Coach Harper, that he's a member of our church here, and that he was involved with you and your brother. So tell us about growing up. What was it like in your home?
First of all, we were from a military family. My dad served in World War II. My grandfather was in World War I, and my great-grandfather rode with Texas Cavalry in the Civil War. So I don't know if it was ever really expected as much growing up as that we were all, myself and my three brothers, were always going to end up going into the military, as much as it was just, I guess, the mentality that we grew up under. Needless to say, it was pretty rough. And the neighborhood that we grew up in was pretty rough, being the youngest of three older brothers. We were all athletic. We all spent a lot of time in the outdoors. My mother and father were married before my mother died. I think they'd been married 65 years. So wow. We was really blessed to have a close-knit family. Probably a lot of the folks that hear this and know my family know, they're probably laughing what it was like to grow up in the Briley family. We was kind of a rough and tumble bunch. We were known for being outgoing, I guess you would say, but we also had a lot of time in a pretty rough neighborhood at the time. North Little Rock was a pretty rough neighborhood where we grew up, and we learned at a very young age to pretty much take care of ourselves when we needed to, as far as any confrontations with other kids and things of that nature.
Now, you are the youngest of four brothers. So I have an older sister, but my mother is the only girl of seven brothers.
Oh, wow.
And she's right in the middle. So she has told me some terrorizing stories of things that her brothers did to her. So I could only imagine, being the youngest of four, that there are those kind of things that happened as well.
Well, talking about some of the things that Donovan and I got into, we would always be out. It seems like trouble would always find us. I don't know if it was the other way around, whether we found it or it found us, but it seems like we always got in a lot of situations, near-death experiences, to say the least. We spent a lot of time at Burns Park out here because we all played baseball, and we've got a lot of time out, like I said, we did a lot of hiking out in the Ouachita Mountains and a lot of outdoor activities. And, one thing that growing up, I always knew that, that Donovan and my other brothers always had my back. We always looked out for each other. We always were taught, and it was ingrained in us deeply, that it was family first,
Yeah, and I think that's something that's not taught very much anymore.
I agree. There's a lot of values that I guess we took for granted growing up about family being first. Patriotism's another, that America's a great country. And, that I think that led each of us to be able to want to serve and to give back to something to the country that we had grown up with, and the freedom was instilled in us, the appreciation for it. And ultimately, I know that Donovan believed in that as well, and he proved it by laying down his life for the freedom that we have in this country.
Absolutely. So you talked about the lineage there of your father, your grandfather, and great grandfather, but it ended up that all four of you boys went into the military.
Correct. Yes, we did. My two oldest brothers have since retired from the Army, and Donovan and I started out here just a short walk from where we're sitting right now at this interview at Camp Robinson. In 1981, he and I went out to Fort Jackson. We were supposed to go to boot camp together and AIT, but he got the Bangkok flu on the airplane, and he ended up 2 weeks behind me for probably the first 6 or 7 weeks of boot camp. I didn't have any idea where he was. I just completely lost contact when they had to carry him to the hospital in an ambulance. The flu had hit him the night at the reception station. So by the time I got back word from my mother in letters that he had written, I finally found out he was in a company on the other side of the post there at Fort Jackson. And I still didn't see him till almost time for me to graduate from boot camp. And then eventually he and I ended up a few weeks later down at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where we completed our technical training with the Army. And we spent several months down at Fort Rucker going through advanced individual training.
So there was that period of time where you just didn't know where he was at or what was really going on?
Right. The last time that I saw him before they hauled him off, I was marching off to the chow hall that morning, and I heard somebody whistle at me, and they were stuffing him in an ambulance. And that's the last time that I had saw him until, like I said, weeks later, and I didn't even know what his status was or anything of that nature. It just so happened that we ended up they made the mistake of putting he and I in the same room together at AIT. So we had a lot of time on our hands on the weekends, and we were probably just 90 miles from Panama City Beach. And we would end up spending a lot of weekends at Panama City, going down on the ocean and so forth and sightseeing,
Yeah. So you were in the Army.
Yes.
And he was also in the Army, but you ended up doing two different jobs, but you worked together for a while, if I recall.
Correct. We, as I said, we went to advanced technical training, and he and I were both crew chiefs out here. Although we were in separate units, we were both at the airfield out here at Camp Robinson for several years. Then we transferred over to an Army Reserve unit out at Little Rock Adams Field. And that's where Donovan ended up going to flight school. And I continued being a crew member on helicopters, helicopter mechanic and crew chief and door gunner. And he, like I said, when he graduated from flight school, he came back to Army Reserve, and he and I ended up flying on the same helicopters together several times. And they always, people that flew with him, talked about how smooth and how good of a pilot he was. And it just so happens that he went on active duty and got stationed over in Korea. And my enlistment was up, and I got out for a few years at that time. But when he got back from Korea, he put in his package for the 160th Aviation Regiment, which was where he was at when he was killed on October 3rd, 1993. He was serving in that unit in Mogadishu, Somalia.
All right. What was it like being in an airplane with your younger brother?
Well, he was, for him, that's a good question. He was 2 years older than me, so he was my older brother. But
that's right. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
I knew what you meant, but I don't know. I guess it was a sense of pride that he and I both, you had that sense of pride, and you also, you had a job to do, and he had a job to do, and crew chiefs and pilots work very closely on aircraft together. They rely on us, and of course we rely on them to be able to fly the aircraft. They rely on us to be able to maintain it. So we had a close relationship as far as that went. It just so happens my son and my nephew are now out here at Camp Robinson, and they're working on helicopters also, and they're both crew chiefs.
Wow.
That's
So
kind of
they're
the tradition.
just carrying it on.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The tradition goes on, so
Yeah.
we're pretty proud of them.
You know, some people that are raised in military homes begin to resent the military and don't want to have anything to do with it. But it sounds like all of you were taught in a way to respect and to be patriotic and to be thankful for those that have paved the way.
Well, it's a lot of opportunity also for us. You know, I didn't, one time I graduated from North Little Rock, I was tired of school myself, and I really considered going to Arkansas Tech University to on a baseball walk-on type scholarship. I'd been talking to them and was weighing my options, and there was just so happened that we had a cousin that was a Vietnam veteran. He was a pilot on helicopters in Vietnam. And we'd talked to him over family gatherings and over the years. And I think that was Donovan and I, we got interested after talking to him and some of the things that he had done, you know, during Vietnam and a lot of the stories that he told.
I went to Arkansas Tech my freshman year, but I had to get out. I couldn't stand being called a wonder boy. You know,
It's funny you say that. My two oldest brothers graduated from Arkansas Tech, and I remember many times going up there that you was talking about tell us a little bit about the family. Anybody that hears that and knew them probably could tell you a lot of stories themselves from being up at Arkansas Tech together. So,
yeah, you have mentioned that Donovan was killed in the line of duty. To your knowledge, because I'm sure there's a lot that you probably don't know, but could you kind of just walk us through what exactly took place?
Well, it was October 3rd, 1993. George H. Bush had put in a peacekeeping force in Mogadishu, Somalia, because if people that remember are old enough to remember now, since it's been 28 years, will be this fall, there was a lot of pictures on the evening news every night of a famine that was going on in Somalia. And George H. Bush at the time put in a United Nations peacekeeping force, excuse me. He put in a force to provide aid and comfort, food to try to stop the famine, which was pretty much being successful. But at the time that his administration was over, President Clinton took over, and they started running into a problem where the warlords were confiscating the food from the refugees. They were intercepting United Nations food shipments. And it got so bad that they actually ambushed the AD was the warlord of that particular tribe that was the strong tribe that was in Mogadishu at that time. It got to the point where they ambushed a United Nations convoy and killed several. I believe it was Pakistanis that they were killed in that ambush, several. And at that time, they decided to deploy a unit that my brother was involved with, the 160th. And it was called Task Force Ranger. And their mission was to hunt down AD and his warlords and bring them to the table and get them to stop interdicting on the United Nations food shipments. That went on for several weeks. They were doing several raids on his warlords and his top lieutenants. The 160th, their primary mission, most of their flights and their missions, they prefer to take them and do them at night because of America's advancements in night vision technology. And unbeknownst to a lot of their intel at the time, the warlords that were interdicting on the food and that had ambushed the United Nations convoy, they were getting rearmed in what they called the market area, which was the heart of Mogadishu. They'd already done several raids down in that area, but they always did them at night where they had the advantage of having night vision over the Somali warlords. That particular day on Sunday, October 3rd, around 3 p.m., they got a intel report saying that AD's warlords, his top lieutenants, were going to be meeting down in the market area, which the 160th and the Rangers that were involved and working with them referred to that as Badlands, or an Indian country is what they called it, because it was such a bad area, and it was a strong point that was held by the warlords. So they got this intel the lieutenants were going to be meeting. And they said they were going to be meeting in that afternoon. I think it was at right around 3 p.m. local time there. So that although a lot of them knew that was going to make their danger a lot greater, they decided it was going to be worth the risk, and they were going to go in and capture these top lieutenants so they could get intel on where AD, the warlord chief, was at. So they deployed. Task Force Ranger deployed with several of the Rangers, quick reaction teams, and several Delta Force operators. They deployed and dropped several of the Rangers in a blocking position around the perimeter of the hotel that they were going to be meeting. AD's warlords were supposed to be meeting. They also dropped Delta Force in to go from the roof of the buildings down to capture, which they did. They did capture them. At that time, as the Rangers had deployed, one of the Rangers basically fell off of the aircraft when he was supposed to be fast roping in. They were under heavy rocket propelled grenade attack, several. And the thing that they did not know is that the Somalians had been rearming through a NATO checkpoint that the Italians, from what a lot of the people on the ground told me, were being bribed and allowing them to rearm into that market area. So they had a lot more ammunition, a lot more of the rocket propelled grenades than anybody knew they had. Donovan had one of the Ranger teams on board his aircraft. He dropped off in the blocking force. They fast roped in. They had recovered the Ranger that had fallen out of one of the aircrafts that had fallen off of the rope, the fast rope they call them. And then they set up an orbiting position, orbiting around the target area, the target building, while the Delta Force brought the captured lieutenants down to the street and started loading them up on a convoy that the Rangers had coming in to take out the prisoners. While Donovan was in orbit providing cover, there were several aircraft. I don't remember exactly how many. There was 6 or 8 of the Black Hawk helicopters and several Little Bird OH-6s that were doing overhead coverage. While Donovan was orbiting around the target area, we found out later, just from talking to a lot of the intel that was able to gather, myself and my brothers that were deeply, of course, they were in the Army, and we did a lot of research afterwards, but they had fired over 110 rocket-propelled grenades at my brother's aircraft alone during that time. And they were in low orbit, which they had to be low to be able to cover the Rangers on the ground because they had a sniper on board his helicopter. At one of the several that they launched out of the 110, I talked to the crew chief later after all of this had transpired, and it was actually at my brother's memorial service and his funeral. I talked to the crew chief that he saw one of the Somali rebels step out of a doorway, and he saw him launch that grenade. He was trying to get his machine gun on him, and by the time he got it, spotted him and was about to shoot, that tribesman or one of those rebels had fired a grenade, hit my brother's tail rotor on his helicopter. Donovan was flying in the co-pilot position on the right-hand side of the helicopter. Chief Warrant Officer Cliff Wilcox was flying as the lead pilot on the left side. At that time, if you've ever seen the documentary, I've seen the actual footage. They went in, they lost their tail rotor. A helicopter tends to do an anti-torque effects and start spinning out of control. The only way to get that under control is to gain forward airspeed. And to do that, you have to lose altitude. So in short, what it amounted to was Donovan's helicopter. They crash landed onto a roof, one of those little Somali shanty shacks that you see on any of the TVs or a lot of third world countries have them. Everybody was on board. That was on board was okay at that point. Within a second or so, though, during the impact, the wall collapsed and the helicopter rolled over onto its side in the alley, killing Donovan and Cliff instantaneous. I know that Donovan was on the upside when it rolled over on its side. He was on the upside on the right side as it rolled over on its side. But the overhead console apparently hit him right across the top of his vertebrae and killed him instantly. So he never even knew that he was going on to be with the Lord at that particular second. Cliff, however, was killed instantly as well. And I know this from talking to the crew chiefs and the guys that were on board that survived it. He was trapped in the wreckage, however. At that time, the word went out that a Black Hawk had went down, and you see that in the movie that you've heard of the Black Hawk Down television show. That's when they were saying the Black Hawk Down, Black Hawk Down. They set up a perimeter around Donovan's aircraft and started getting the survivors out, the injured crew chief and the Army personnel that were still on board. And they set up a protective perimeter around that building. This was probably a block away from where the Rangers had captured the warlord lieutenants. So they were kind of already stretched out. So they had to set up a pretty wide perimeter around his crash site. At that time, they got it secured. They've got, I know they got Donovan out right away from the wreck and the other injured individuals. And like I said, when they set up that perimeter, I think it was just within about a 5-minute period, they got word that a second Black Hawk was hit by RPG. That was Michael Durant's aircraft. And then you ended up seeing that on the news, and found out later that he was held hostage for over a week. And that was his crew members that you saw pictures of them being dragged through the streets. That was 2 other Delta Force operators were there with him. And it talks about they ended up winning the Medal of Honor. They fought to the death, defended Michael Durant because he was injured. And that pretty much was what went down as far as when Donovan died for his country. Brian, I always tell people that when I talk about, the event of Donovan getting killed on duty, if all of those guys that were killed, there was 18 Americans killed in that firefight that ensued after they set up the perimeter. They were basically there on the ground after the other aircraft, Michael Durant, being shot down. They were stretched to them. They had no way to get the other Rangers out. And by then, all of the rebels had it just enclosed around them. And that's what, you had probably a 14 or 15 hour firefight where they just fought basically the whole city just came in on them. There was they estimate probably 1,500 casualties on the Somalian side as they were fighting the Rangers that set up. And that the whole night, just to keep from being overrun, the OH-6 Little Birds were just coming in, suppressive fire on the enemy constantly all night to keep the Rangers from being overrun, Also, the reason they stayed is because they were not going to leave Cliff's body in the wreckage, and they were not, their motto, Rangers never leave a man behind. So they stayed there to protect that aircraft and protect his body because they weren't going to leave him in the city,
So if I understand, their mission there with Donovan was to provide support to the Rangers who were on the ground?
Correct. That was their primary mission, was to be able to do, to be able to insert the Rangers or the Delta Force operators into their whole mission was try to capture AD. That's what their mission was, because he was the one that was interdicting the food shipments. And President Clinton had made it a mandate that they needed to capture him in order for peace to have a chance, basically, and for the United Nations shipments to continue under security rather than being having to worry about getting ambushed and overrun as far as the convoys and things of that nature.
So me not having a lot of knowledge about this happened in 90, what did you say?
October 3rd, 1993.
Okay.
That's when it happened. What I was going to say, with Donovan, knowing him and knowing most of those guys, I knew all of them personally just from meeting them that were in Donovan's unit. I knew them. I didn't know any of the Rangers till after that battle. I got to know several of them, talking to them at different memorial services that we went to. Any of those guys, the 18 Americans that got killed, I know Donovan. I know I can speak for him just growing up with him and knowing him as good as anybody did, I suppose. But I know that if they would have told him, hey, you're not coming back from this mission, he would have still went on that mission, Brian, because that was just the type of guy he was. He was never quit, never give up. That was the motto, really, of the unit that they were. That's why he sought out the 160s, because they're the cream of the crop when it comes to Army aviation. They're the most elite helicopter unit there is probably on planet Earth,
So with the situations going on, Adid, was he some big figure before all of this happened, or did he just kind of decide They were going to.
He was a big figure for Mogadishu. It was, and it really hasn't changed that much in 28 years. I mean, they're still fighting, still killing each other. And he was just happened to be the warlord with the most guns, Of course, they're involved in drug trafficking and a lot of the other illicit exploits that they do. But yeah, he happened to be probably the most powerful warlord at that time. And like I said, he was rearming a lot more than the intelligence reports were telling the Rangers and my brother's unit, that they weren't aware that they were rearming as much as they had been, As a matter of fact, we later found out that was U.S. Army's and the U.S. military's first actual contact with Al-Qaeda. It was Al-Qaeda that was rearming ADs. He had linked up with the Al-Qaeda, and they had done a lot of training with those rebels that taught them to set those grenades on their rocket RPGs. They had taught them how to cause those grenades to airburst, so they were more effective in taking down helicopters, because they had been studying, like I said, for several different missions before that. They'd been studying the tactics that the 160th was using at that time.
So from the time that the helicopter went down, and then knowing that the second Black Hawk went down, how long did it take for the Rangers to regain control to where they could?
I think it was around 16 hours. I'm not exactly sure of the exact. I mean, I could look it up, but as far as the total amount of time they were on the ground there, I know they were running low. One of the Rangers that had been wounded died because he wasn't able to get resupplied with plasma. They were getting low on ammunition and everything else. They had been there at least 13 hours. I know it may have been right around that. I may be off an hour or two on it, but they were there for a long amount of time. And what they were waiting for was a rapid reaction force that was trying to get to them to relieve them. But in the meantime, they had been setting up roadblocks all over Mogadishu, and they were blocking that relief force from coming in. Well, those guys ended up getting turned around and lost in all the back roads, and they got shot up so bad they had to go back and refit and rearm, which took more time. So this was an all-night event. It was going on, nonstop. And those guys, like I said, they were outnumbered. Well, there was probably, I think, a total of 150, counting the Ranger and the whole task force. And they was fighting a city of, several thousand warlords and the rebels that were there.
So it also kind of sounds like maybe the rebels knew this was going to take place.
I know just from as time's passed, I've found more and more bits and pieces of the intelligence of what went. That was something that I was just driven myself to find out. A lot of the details of what went on. Of course, I wanted to know exactly where and when and how the battle went down, and what Donovan was probably experiencing at that moment before he departed this earth. It was a lot of information that we had to find out that we wasn't sure of. And, I know that they had been rearming. I know that Al-Qaeda was involved with them. And it just so happens, just a point to be made, that the 160th was the same unit 10 years later that would take the SEALs in to kill Osama bin Laden over in Pakistan. So it took them 10 years to finally to get a payback, so to speak, of what had happened and transpired in Mogadishu that cost so many of them their lives,
Right. So they were able to bring Donovan and Mike back into a secure area.
Yes, that morning as the sun started to come up, they finally got relieved. They got a relief force in there. That convoy was able to get in there, and they were able to, actually they had to wait. They was waiting on United Nations armored personnel carriers. They finally got enough of those together where they were able to make a strong enough convoy with the convoy in to have a thicker skin type vehicle because they were getting shot up so bad with the first convoy that tried to come in and relieve them. They finally got a task force together that was strong enough to be able to push their way in by the next morning, and they was able to get Cliff's body out of the helicopter at that time, and were able to pull out all the other Rangers. And you hear, if you do any research, you'll hear them talk about the Mogadishu Mile, and that was a lot of the Rangers that they were so shot up, and a lot of them they just had to stuff into those armored personnel carriers and were taking them out. And it just so happens as they were bringing up the rear, some of them ended up having to run a mile or two behind out in the open. At the end of that battle, after fighting all night, they had to run behind the convoy to make it back to the stadium where they were rallying all the wounded and regroup, that morning.
So now that they are back in a secure location, mm-hmm. What happens next?
Well, one of the things that happened was they were planning on going back at that time. Michael Durant, as I'd mentioned, was being held hostage by AD. He was the only survivor out of his helicopter that went down and crashed probably 3 or 4 miles over from where Donovan's helicopter had crashed. He was the only survivor that wasn't. They got overrun at that position. The 2 Delta Force operators that gave their lives were defending Michael Durant's aircraft, and he had a real bad broke leg, and he was ended up a week later got released. What happened at the end result of all this, within 3 days of that battle going on, President Bill Clinton had 2 Army pilots fly AD'd over to peace talks. And that's one of the things that really bothered me and a lot of the people that served there. I know a lot of the Rangers and 160s felt the same way, that really all they wanted to do was go in and finish their mission. But they, after that, losing 2 helicopters and 18 Americans, the administration, Bill Clinton's administration, just didn't have the stomach for it. Mm-hmm. And they ended up bringing AD to peace talks over and trying to solve the situation and being able to get the food supplies back in,
Now looking back, knowing that took place, how did that make you feel personally about what had happened?
Well, Brian, we talked a little bit before this interview. It's been 28 years now, and it's something that a family member, a Gold Star family member means that you're next of kin to an individual that died in service to their country in the military. The way that, when I got word that Donovan had been killed, I was stationed in the Navy at the time in Charleston, South Carolina. Matter of fact, we'd just been to church that morning, and we was about to eat lunch when I got the call from Donovan's wife that he had been killed. At that moment, not that I was surprised as much. We knew how dangerous that mission was, or his missions were. He'd had several close calls. He had been in Panama. I know he'd been in Panama when we had that battle down there to overthrow that government. He'd been in several different close calls. Just being in that unit is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Mostly that's all they do is dangerous missions. So it really wasn't as much as a surprise. It's just something there's no way to prepare yourself for it. It was like getting hit with a ton of bricks just all at once, the way that I guess I dealt with the grief, they say there's 7 stages of grief. I don't recall going through the 7 stages of grief. Being a soldier, and as I said, we were all raised to be warriors. What really transpired was a lot of anger. I'll be honest with you, I felt a lot of bloodlust is what I wanted. The Somalians that had been responsible all the way up to, I resented, just really angry at the way the Secretary of Defense, Les Aspin, at that time, they'd requested heavy gunships and heavy armor to be able to do their mission. He turned it down to the Task Force Ranger. He turned it down because he thought it was too provocative at the time. And ultimately, the way that it was handled by Bill Clinton's administration, it just really left a lot of resentment in me towards the government as a whole, towards the government that was in power at that time in Washington, D.C., the way that they just left those guys hanging down there. Well, they sent them in to do a mission, and they had not gave them the support they needed to do it in a safe manner and an effective as they could have been. So I had a lot of anger to work through over the years. It really, it got to the point where, I had a wife and 3 small children at the time, and my career in the military was coming due to an end, myself in the Navy due to an injury. So my enlistment was almost up, and I was having to make a lot of choices in my career, what I was going to do with the future. And I had this pent up rage where I really there was really no one to express it to. I talked to a lot of the guys that were there on the ground, and they have dealt with a lot of the same issues. And since then, a lot of the veterans have dealt with the issues that I've had to deal with, not just as losing a blood brother, but as other brothers in arms, that we serve with. And I've had to just really keep my guard up, and I want to bring my focus back to where the Lord took me with that, because I'll be, without Jesus Christ being in my life, Brian, and my relationship with him, it would have utterly destroyed me. There's no way to carry something that you see American troops that being drugged through the streets by some little third world country, and just the defilement and everything that picture can instill in you or cause to come up to the surface. The anger and the rage, I started really for several years there, just really kind of kept it pent up, and it started to manifest itself with really, I didn't realize I was doing at the time, but it started self-medicating, started drinking real heavy. And I kept going back. Fortunately, I kept my relationship with the Lord and still in a lot of prayer and time and seeking him and seeking answers, because it just wasn't getting any better with that rage. And, there was just a bitterness. Anytime that you allow, and I've learned this over the years, anytime that you allow an event or anything in your life, whether it be that or something else, if you give the enemy an opportunity to cause bitterness, or for you to take hold of that bitterness and have a revenge, or someone you want to get even with, for example, or someone that you resent to the point where you let bitterness take a root in your life. If you don't turn that over to the Lord and you learn how to forgive that person, you're going to be the one that pays the price. It took me a long time to learn that.
Yeah. Guilt and anger and all of that kind of stuff only affects us.
And that's something else that I really experienced a lot of. Donovan and I being so close, and us flying together, us in serving together. I felt a lot of survivor's guilt. It just ate me up that I wasn't able to be there with him or for him. And I remember going through my mind, if I'd have been there, we could have done something different. And really, it comes down to a reflection on, Brian, we're really all invincible until our time's up on this earth. And God numbered our days here. In eternity past, he knew how long we were going to be here. And that's why it's so important not to let bitterness to take a hold in your life, because every day we have is precious. Life is precious. Although, we look at a third world country like Mogadishu, life is not precious. I've been to several third world countries, and it's something that, life is cheap there to them. They take day by day. They live from one day to the next, a lot of times not even knowing if they're going to be there. Just like, I guess we could all say that, though. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. If we let a bitterness or a resentment or not forgiving a wrong done to us, it's just going to end up eating us up inside. And, I had to put that aside and get on with my life. And it wasn't a short journey, believe me. It took years and years for me to be able to deal with that. And, I've got to give credit to the Lord that I was able to do that,
Yeah. Now you mentioned that the way you found out about his death was by his wife calling you. Did he have any children?
Yes, he had a daughter. She was 5 years old at the time.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so he was, that's another source of pain, just, leaving a widow and a young daughter behind that, we've tried to stay close to each other. And, over the years, and she's now married and has 2 children of her own. But just that loss also, again, could be turned to resentment. The fact that, she was left without a dad to grow up with,
Yeah. Now, how old was he when he was killed?
5 years old. She was 5.
How old was Donovan when
He was 33.
33. Do you know how long of time was between his death and when his wife was notified? Does that happen fairly quickly? Or?
Yes. Well, I know that it does, in a perfect world, it does. I'm sure she got word within less than 12 hours. I'm sure they're real. I know that 160th has been great. They've still, over the years have done a great job in supporting her, supporting his daughter. Excuse me. Matter of fact, that they even have a scholarship fund that they've set up for fallen Night Stalkers. That's the unit's motto. Their name is Night Stalkers. So they have a scholarship fund where they take care of the fallen Night Stalkers, children and widows. And it's just you couldn't ask for more than the support that they've given over these years, It's above and beyond what you would expect from anybody.
So what was your, whenever I've been told that somebody has died that I'm close to, it's almost as if all time stops.
Mm-hmm.
What was that first kind of 24 hours for you? What was the moves that you made, the things that you did?
I had a lot of contacts that I was just burning up the phones trying to figure out what happened. First of all, to confirm for sure that he had been killed, because the information was coming in was sketchy. We were getting bits and pieces of information, some incorrect information. We was trying to figure out, first of all, I wanted to know, at the same time, we're seeing CNN, they're dragging American soldiers through the streets of Mogadishu, and you're seeing little tribesmen surfing on their bodies and being stripped naked and dragging their corpses through the street. Again, my immediate reaction to that was just total rage seeing that and just coming to grips with the loss. It was just, like I said, one side of me was thinking that it was just unbelievable, and the other was just kind of, I'd been trained, in the military to think while in the middle of crisis. So, I was having clear thought and trying to main thing I was trying to figure out was what was going on. I ended up flying back up to Fort Campbell, where the 160th is their primary unit was at, was visiting with Michael Durant's family the day that he was released from being with a hostage. So we was staying in contact with a lot of the support that was there at Fort Campbell through the 160th, talking to the chaplain, talking to a lot of the people letting us know the information. At one point, I even talked to SEAL Team 6, which is they're the ones that ended up going in and taking out Osama bin Laden. But I was talking to one of the senior enlisted members there that were trying to find out as much details as I could about the battle and what happened. And so, there was a lot of different emotions going through with me. I was trying to be able to find out as much information to be able to try to minister to my parents. They were dealing with the loss of their son, and all of our family members, Donovan's widow and his daughter. We were there with her, and, it was just no person should have to be able to deal with that kind of loss. My heart broke for my mother and my father losing their son, and just overall the family, just a deep wound that really, there's no human experience that can prepare you for something like that,
And really all over greed of somebody wanting to control if somebody had food or not.
Right. And that's the things that I've just gone over the years. I've just looked at just the harsh reality of the evil in the world. The fact of the matter is, Brian, that person that squeezed the trigger that caused my brother to be killed, Jesus died for him just as much as he died for me on the cross. That's really hard to come to a point of forgiveness where you have to turn it over to the Lord. You can't carry a burden like that,
Yeah, and it's very difficult, especially when we look at grace being unconditional.
That's right. And God's grace is what has carried me and still does every day. I don't deserve to be here any more than Donovan did. Every day that we take, I've tried to make my life every day be redeemed by the blood of Christ. Every day, there's nothing that we do on this planet that's going to be worthwhile in eternity in the future, except for what we do for Christ's sake. That's the reality of it.
Mm. So, in the days to come after notified, presumably they brought his body back, and you were able to have a funeral at some point in time.
Yes, we. I think it was probably just within a short time. We were kind of at that time. I was for the first few weeks of that whole event. I was kind of running on autopilot. I was trying to be everywhere for everybody that I could be that needed my support. I still had two young children at the time. My youngest son wasn't born yet, but I still had a wife and two children to take care of. And, I took leave from the Navy to came back here for funeral services. And actually we had it right out here in North Little Rock where Donovan's buried. And they had the missing pilot formation that flew over. And that's when a lot of it just really started hitting me. Those helicopters flew over and I at the time, I really didn't realize it, but, I just the resentment at that time, really a resentment towards, it wasn't hit Donovan's unit, but just the overall structure of the way things had been allowed to unfold. It really started again, that's when I started struggling with the bitterness that didn't know it at the time, but I was not willing to forgive those that I held, accountable for those or be held accountable for those events that transpired. We had the funeral out here in North Little Rock. I went to several different memorial services at Fort Campbell, and a lot of the pilots that had been Cliff and Donovan and the other pilots, just several weeks of going to memorial services and talked to a lot of the Rangers there. A lot of those guys, they were still wounded and showing up. Talked to a lot of the crew members that were there. I talked to most all the 160th crew members that were there, including Donovan's crew chief. He had a finger shot off in the battle, and he was telling. I got a lot of the details of what happened at that last moment that Donovan, transpired. And I know what he was doing. He was just going through, being a professional that he was. He was just calmly. Cliff had the controls at that time, and he was just calmly going through the emergency procedures, that he'd been trained to do. Being the quiet professional that he was, that's what he was doing till his last moment, doing his job to make sure he could save as many lives on board that helicopter as possible,
Yeah. Well, we can be thankful that he wasn't captured and tortured as others were.
Well, that's the truth, and has been since the War on Terror. I have several family members and in-laws and things of that nature whose sons have been over in Afghanistan and Iraq, and a lot of the people that have been killed. I've known several that have been killed since then in battles, and just it's a terrible price that we have to pay. The freedom, people take that a lot of times, I know, as a canned phrase, that you say freedom's never free. But the fact of the matter is that it's cost a lot of men and women over the years. I think it's been over, I might be wrong on my figures, but I think it's been over 6 million people that have died for freedom for this country since we have been founded. And that's a terrible price to pay, for freedom. But, if you think about it though, Brian, if we look at freedom that we have, and we have freedom over death, Jesus conquered death on the cross when he rose from the grave 3 days later. And the freedom that he gave us is so much greater than the freedom that people that have died. No greater love does a man have than they willingly lay down his life for a friend. And that freedom that Donovan died for, he that's him to the T. He laid down his life for his friends and for his country. And, the freedom that we have through Christ allowed me to be able to heal, to be able to tell people that are going through grief. Since that time, I've lost both my parents, I was just going through the loss of when Donovan got killed there in Somalia. I just lost my grandfather. I was out in the North Sea, and it took me 3 days before I could even get to a phone to even talk to my family. And when I did finally reach my mother and grandmother, they had already buried my grandfather, and he was like, my grandparents were very close to myself and my brothers. They were like another set of parents. We had a very close knit family. And I lost I lost a uncle that I was real close to. And I was just now starting to come with a lot of the family members that I'd held near and dear to me. Was dealing with that. And, and then all of a sudden I had to deal with my brother that was closest to me. We, had to deal with his loss, and it was just above and beyond what I was capable of effectively dealing with. I was able to function, as a father and still maintain my job in the military. And over the years, when we came back to Arkansas about 4 years after that, I've got into business, went into business for myself, and I've raised 3 children, and my wife and I are still married, over 26 years now. And I've been able to keep it together. And the only way that I've been able to do that is relying on God's grace. I couldn't have done it by myself. I know where I would be if it wasn't for God's grace. I would not be here today,
Right. Now, you mentioned survivor's guilt, and we see that a lot in many different cases. But at the end of the day, we really have to remember that there was nothing that we could do to change it because we weren't there. And if we allow that guilt and that bitterness and that anger and resentment to just keep building, we're going to lash out. And typically we lash out at the people we know we're safe to lash out, whether it be a wife or a child or whoever it is, and that just doesn't produce much.
It is, and it's a sense of helplessness too. Survival, really what that comes down to, survivor guilt. It's a sense of helplessness, and there is no solution for it. The only solution is relying on Christ's grace. And you're right, it does. It manifests itself with those that are closest to us that we love. And, my wife took the brunt of a lot of the behavior and the traits that I was developing through it and through the rage. The rage is what I just had so much to deal with. And I had no other than just exercise and, activities, healthy activities. It wasn't enough to get rid of that rage and the resentment that I had, and that she bore a lot of the brunt as far as it affected our relationship and our closeness, over the years. And God's been able to heal that in us, but and I've been able to help her through a lot of, the grief that she's suffered through losing her mother recently about a battle with cancer. And we've been able to help each other. And I just, God provided, a strong wife for me. And I'm thankful. I look back and look at all the pieces and the people that God has put me in contact with over the years, and a lot of the tragedy that I've faced since a very young age that we won't go into today, but just a lot of the loss that I've seen and death and a lot of the things that I've had to deal with. God He's doing that for a reason, is to be able to, I know that at least I can help other people that are going through similar experiences,
So then several years later, the movie Black Hawk Down came out.
Mm-hmm.
Did they contact your family or anything of that nature?
No, they they ended up, it was a book. Mark Bowden had written that book, and the movie was based on that book. I had read the book, Brian, and he contacted a few of the people I think that were in the unit at that when it went down, and contacted some of the Rangers that were there. He didn't contact family members that I know of, unless it was someone that I didn't know about. And then when the movie came out a year or two after the book, it was, I think that they did a good job on the movie. It's not accurate, just like completely accurate. They, as my dad would say, they Hollywooded it up, But, if anything, it brings it leaves a documentation of the price that those got, the valor. Who knows what people were reached there in Mogadishu in that country? Who knows what they learned or what they got out of the people that were saved as a result of seeing those men's valor, or even the loss that was inflicted from that battle. It's something that I've learned over the years the hard way, that God turns loss into his glory. He always turns it in, good or evil, one way or the other. It's going to glorify God in the end.
Mm-hmm. So when you read the book or you watched the movie, did that kind of reignite an old flame of the rage and anger?
Yes, it did. And honestly, I think I've watched that movie once, and it took a long time before I was able to watch it a second time. It just uncapped a lot of the emotions that it also brought out, a lot of the emotions that I had kept bottled up over the years. And I still find myself doing that. I still reflect on, hey, is this a result of that tragedy? Is it something that I've allowed to, again, is that something that the enemy can use, being Satan, the enemy? Is that something he can use in my life to come between me and my relationship with Christ? That's what it comes down to. So, I guess I'm a little older, 28 years older now, and a little wiser, where, I'd be on guard, for that type of, there's all kinds of tactics that the enemy will use, and to try to trip us up with our walk with Christ. Anything that he can use that's a weakness of ours, he will use to try to interfere with our relationship with abiding with Christ day by day.
Absolutely. So being a member of a Gold Star family, which I want to reiterate what you said, is simply the acknowledgement of being a family member of someone who paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Yes, it's a direct family, direct next of kin is the way that the military would define it. So it could be a child, a brother, a sister, a parent, a wife, a husband.
Yeah, and so where some people would see that as a medal of valor to their family, others may see that as a constant reminder of the horror and the tragedy, especially if they're not dealing with the anger and the rage. And
yeah, they could, and it is a reminder. It is, and I want to be reminded. We should be reminded. Everyone
Absolutely.
should be reminded of the price that it cost us. It's never free. We take it, and so many of the young kids growing up now, also, I don't want to pick on any particular age group. A lot of people say the millennials, that the entitlement that American kids have nowadays, they think that it's always been like this, that they have these entitlements that, free education, free whatever nowadays. But, we're not entitled to anything. The only thing that we are entitled to is our God-given liberty.
Mhm.
Anything other than that has been bought with blood through men standing up for the Constitution. That is our rule of law. The pursuit of happiness is guaranteed through our Constitution. And the Constitution that I see now is under such attack. That's the oath that we take when we serve the military, that we are sworn to uphold the Constitution. The reason being is because that is the foundation of the freedom we have under rule of law in this country. I want to be reminded, and I want everyone that will listen to be reminded that that's not free. It cost a lot of men their lives, and it's cost a lot of family their loved ones' blood throughout history of the United States.
But they willingly went.
They did. And, as I mentioned earlier in our interview, Brian, if Donovan would have known, if someone had come say, hey, I'm sending you on this mission and you're not coming back, he wouldn't have hesitated for it. Maybe he did know. Who knows? Maybe I know Donovan was a Christian. God may have very well instilled in him an inspiration. You may not come back from this. He may have known that his time was up. Who knows? We don't know. We don't know till that last moment, how long we're going to have on this earth. And that's why it's so important that we make every day count. And what it really is going to make the difference in eternity is that every day that we live, if we can take a moment of that day or the whole day, the more we can bring glory to God, that's what's going to matter for eternity.
Mm. I find myself as a pastor and as a counselor finding where there have been family conflict and we no longer talk to this member of the family. And I just kind of gently remind them that, hey, life's too short. Life's too short
Man.
to carry that kind of burden of guilt or hate or resentment, whatever it may be. And I'm reminded of in your story that you had to get to a point of where you realized the rage and the bitterness and resentment wasn't doing anybody any good,
Right.
and that it was hurting you. And so then you had to turn that into a way that was bringing glory and honor, not just to your family, but to the Lord. But a lot of us don't seem to get to that point.
Well, maybe a lot of us haven't had the amount of. Some people have had loss. Some people have not experienced loss in their family like we have. I know as a Gold Star family, I don't wish that upon anybody. There's nothing that can prepare you for that. The loss that I have, I just again have to say that the only way that I could have endured it, and the only way that I have endured it, is time has passed. That any grief is going to be no less bitter. The grief will be no less, but I guess you get used to living with it. The important thing is that you live with it in a healthy manner. You live with it in a way that is not going to eat you up inside. Because again, if you have any resentment towards other people, if you have things that are wrong that you feel that someone else has done you, if you allow that to take root in your life, the enemy is going to take that and he's going to turn it into a source of chain sinning in your life. And as I mentioned, that with me, I started, heavy drinking for several years, and I didn't get to a point where it did cause a lot of relationship problems, and a few brushes with the local law enforcement and things of that nature. But, the thing is that even going through those times, God, taught me that the only way this isn't the answer. The only answer is for you to rely on me moment by moment. And that means that we have to keep lines of communication open with God. It's a two-way street. We don't sit around and, call out on God in our grief only, or we calling out with him on the good things that are happening in our life, the blessings that he's pouring out on us, or are we just calling on him when we're down and we have nowhere else to turn? God will be there either way,
Absolutely. But it's important for us to keep their memory and their sacrifice at heart and at hand.
It is. And we also need to raise our children now, to appreciate what we have in this country, the patriotism, I try to instill that I have 4 grandchildren now, and I try to instill that in them, the patriotism, the love of our country, and an appreciation for what we have that so many now take for granted and think it's just, an entitlement that they're required for the government to provide for them. And it's not been like that until, fairly recently that you look at the individuals that, like my dad, he went off to World War II when he was 15 years old. And you look at the price that I'm a kind of a history buff, and I look at the price that just the terrible conditions that they went through and fighting Nazi Germany and fighting the Empire of Japan. And, I've been out to Pearl Harbor, and you look at the destruction that was caused there when Japan attacked us, and throughout history, just the amount of loss that we have faced. That they don't teach history like they used to. They don't teach it in the schools. Parents aren't passing that down to their children. And it's at the risk of being lost. As the last of the great generation, the World War II veterans pass on. My dad passed away, I think 3 years ago now, and he was 91 years old, and he was 15 when he went off to World War II, and I'm not sure there can't be that many left. And, it's our responsibility to pass that torch on, to teach our children the ways in which they should go, also in serving God,
Absolutely. So if there was one thing that you could say about your brother Donovan in his memory and his honor, what would that one thing be?
One thing. Thank you is what I would say. Thank you for, always being there. There's really no way I could sum up his life in one thing except thank you.
Mm.
He and I, we didn't always see eye to eye. We fought a lot as kids, young boys growing up. And, but one thing about it, he was always there for me. He always had my back and I always had his, tried to. Mm. He was just that type of guy. He would be there when the chips were down. Donovan was going to be there,
Yeah. So what would be one thing that you would say to our current state of America? And I think that we have gone, this is going to sound really bad, but we've gone so long without there being tremendous loss like we have had, that I think we have, even as a whole, forgotten the sacrifices that have been made.
One thing that I would say to our country, our state of that we're in, we could spend all day, Brian, talking about all the things that are being done wrong right now, taking God out of our education system, all the different moral decisions that have decayed this country for the last, especially in my lifetime, since Vietnam War. A lot of the people that were out there burning the flag and things of that nature are now in power today. Really, it comes down to all the things, the problems that we're having socially, the social justice warriors and all that going on. It really comes down to that. The problem is that we have in society is that they've taken God out of the picture, and man is being left. God's a perfect gentleman. He's going to allow a country, if we keep on turning our back on him and saying, we don't want you in our government, God, we don't want you in our schools, we don't want you in our family. He's a perfect gentleman. He's going to allow us to do that. And the end result of that is it's going to be an utter and total corrupt society. And that's eventually what's going to be the future of this country. And there's no guarantee you're going to have a country. Who knows if we're going to have a country in 20 years, but I know that all these things are coming together. I've a good friend of mine that I talk to a lot, a fellow Christian that I've been friends with for years. We were talking the other day and I was talking about, all of my friends that I talk to, we talk about how America's fallen apart. It's falling apart. The country's falling apart. The world's falling apart. You look at what's going on in Israel right now. And, what we need to realize, though, and it helped me realize, that it's not falling apart. It's falling together in God's plan. And although I'm not happy with the way things are going, I could allow that to turn to resentment and bitterness. But we have to understand that God's in control. He is in control. He's in control of the past, present, and future. And there's no guarantees with us, with God. There's no guarantees that we're going to have a country, because this country wasn't given to us. We fought for it. And we established that the reason he's blessed this country for all these years is because we were living under a constitution that was based on the rule of law, based on his word and his laws. That's what our country was founded on. And the farther we turn away from those fundamental truths that are found in his word, the more we're going to see the decay of society.
Absolutely. Well, Micah, I thank you for being able to share with us today about Donovan. And I know that his story to you is something, in talking to your brother's wife, Duke's wife, who got me in contact with you. She said he would be the best one to do it. And so we're thankful that you were willing to be here and
It's an honor
to share with us. So any last things you'd like to say?
Well, it's an honor. Thank you, Brian, for allowing me. I never feel worthy of the mission or the job of representing, Donovan. I sure haven't paid the price that he's paid. I just want people to remember the things that we've talked about today. And when it comes down to it, it's an honor to be here. But I hope that maybe it's just a statement that you and I have been able to talk about today, that honor will be reflected back to Christ. That's what I hope will be the result of our discussion today.
Absolutely.
To him be the glory.
Amen. All right. Thank you for listening today. I'm Doc Brian. You can find me at thedocbrian.com. All of my social media links are available at the bottom of that page. And we invite you to subscribe to our podcast here. Doc Brian and Doc Talks is a part of the Be Frank Network. You can check out all of our podcasts there at befrank.com. Once again, Micah, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your willingness to share.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.